Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. I asked the Ouija board about my unborn child. The answer was horrifying. Alright, so I know this is going to sound completely insane, but stick with me because this really happened, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I'm not really into paranormal stuff. You know, I'm just an average guy. I've always been pretty skeptical about all that ghost and spirit stuff. At least I used to be. But a few months ago, I went down a rabbit hole that messed me up more than I ever thought possible. And honestly, I'm scared as hell. It all started when my wife, Emily, told me she was pregnant. We'd been trying for a baby for about a year, and we were over the moon when we finally got the news. Everything was going great. We were planning the nursery, buying baby clothes, all the usual first-time parent stuff. But the excitement came with a lot of nerves too. You know, all the what-ifs. What if something goes wrong? What if the baby has some sort of condition? What if we're not ready for this? That sort of thing. Now this is where I probably messed up. One night I was hanging out with a few buddies at a small get-together. Just a low-key Saturday night. We'd had a couple of drinks, and naturally, after a few beers, the conversation drifted into weird territory. My friend Jake brought up this old Ouija board he found in his attic. He was joking around, saying he wanted to try it out. I'd heard of Ouija boards before, but like I said, I wasn't a believer. I just thought it was some stupid game people used to scare themselves. But then Jake said something that hooked me. He said, "You can ask the board about anything. Past, present, future. People ask it about their kids all the time." I don't know why that stuck with me. Maybe it was the booze or the anxiety about becoming a dad, but I found myself thinking, what if I could find out something about my unborn kid? Like, just for fun. See if it says it'll be a boy or girl. At that point, it didn't feel like a bad idea. It felt more like a joke, a way to mess around with my friends. So, I caved. We all sat down around Jake's coffee table, lit some candles, for the vibes, as Jake called it, and placed the board down in front of us. There were 4 of us. Me, Jake, his girlfriend Tara, and this other guy, Mark, who was way more into paranormal stuff than any of us. He's one of those dudes who watches ghost hunting shows and swears he's seen a spirit in his house before. I think I rolled my eyes when he told us that again. We started slow. You know, the usual, "Is anyone here with us?" kind of questions. At first, nothing happened, which is what I expected. But then, after a few minutes, the planchette started to move. Slowly, but definitely moving. It felt cold under my fingers, almost like it was vibrating. Now I was 100% sure Jake was moving it. He's always messing around, and I figured he was just trying to freak us out. But then it started answering questions with words that didn't make sense. Like, we asked it how many spirits were in the room, and it spelled out TREE. What the hell does that even mean? That's when it hit me. What if I asked it about my unborn baby? Just for kicks. So I did. I asked, "Will my baby be healthy?" The planchette stopped for a second, and I swear to God, the air around us got heavier. I know that sounds dramatic, but it felt like everything just paused, and then it started moving again. Slow, deliberate. HEALTHY. Okay, cool, I thought. That's good, right? Healthy baby, no big deal. But then Tara, probably feeling braver after seeing it answer something, nudged me with a grin. "Ask it something else," she said. I don't know why I did, but I felt like I needed more than just that one-word answer. Like, I wanted something deeper, you know? So I asked the Ouija board the question that I think no one should ever ask. What will my child be like? I don't know why I asked it, and looking back I wish I hadn't. The planchette started moving again, but this time it felt faster, like it was in a rush to tell me something. A NGRY. That's when I felt the first twinge of something off. Like, why would it say that? Angry. That didn't make sense. I laughed it off awkwardly, like, okay, guess I'll have a little hellraiser on my hands, right? But inside, something didn't sit right. The air in the room felt thick, and I could tell everyone else noticed it too, because the joking atmosphere we'd had before was gone. Everyone was quiet, staring at the board. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. Feeling more uneasy but also weirdly compelled, I asked one last question. When will my child be born? The planchette hesitated again, then slowly moved to the numbers. I stared at the numbers, not understanding. My wife was only a few months pregnant. Our baby was due in March of next year, not May. I looked at the others, but they were just as confused as I was. Tara tried to laugh it off. Maybe it's talking about a different year, she said, but her voice was shaky. I could see the uncertainty in her face. I wish that was the end of it. But what happened next made my blood run cold. The planchette started moving again, faster this time, like something was pushing it hard. BEFORE 205 before. Before what? Just as I was about to ask, the candles flickered and went out all at once, plunging the room into darkness. And then we heard it. This faint, distant sound, almost like a baby crying. But my wife was home, far from here, and she wasn't due for months. The moment the candles went out, everything inside me told me to leave. I don't know if you've ever felt that kind of fear, the kind that hits you so fast it's like your body goes numb. But I didn't move. None of us did. We were all frozen, staring at each other through the dark, trying to process what just happened. Then we heard it again. That crying sound. It wasn't loud, just a faint, distant wail. It sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away, like through a long hallway, but at the same time, it felt like it was inside the room with us. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I remember thinking, this can't be real. But it was. Jake scrambled for his phone and turned on the flashlight, casting these long shadows across the room. We scanned every corner, expecting to see something, but there was nothing. Just 4 freaked out people sitting in a too quiet living room. Jake broke the silence first, forcing a laugh. Dude, that's probably someone's TV, right? His voice cracked at the end, and no one believed him, not even him. Mark, remember the guy who's obsessed with all the ghost hunting stuff? Was white as a sheet, like he had seen this kind of thing before, but he wasn't enjoying it anymore. Then Tara whispered, "What if it's the board?" That hit me like a punch to the gut. Up until that moment, I had been clinging to the idea that this was some weird coincidence, maybe a neighbour's baby crying through the walls, but her words made it real. We were sitting here, asking questions about my unborn child, and now we were hearing a baby cry, right after it spelled out, before. I didn't want to connect the dots, but it felt like the answer was staring me in the face. "Let's just stop," I muttered, trying to pull my hands away from the planchette. My fingers were ice cold, like I had been gripping something metallic in the dead of winter. But just as I started to pull back, the board pulled me back. I'm not kidding. It felt like something was keeping my hands glued to it. I looked at the others, Jake, Tara, and Mark, and they had the same freaked out look on their faces. None of us could let go. Our fingers were stuck to the damn thing. I tried to pull harder, but it felt like invisible hands were holding me there. "Dude, what the hell is happening?" Jake hissed, his flashlight beam shaking. He was trying to pry his fingers loose with his other hand, but it was useless. Then, without any of us asking another question, the planchette moved again. Fast, like it was in a hurry. I could barely keep up with it. NOTYOURS. Not yours. What the hell did that mean? I looked at Jake, who looked as confused as I was, but the meaning was sinking in for all of us. It was talking about the baby. I felt a knot in my stomach tighten. The baby was mine and Emily's. We'd been trying for so long, planning for this for so long, and now this board was telling me it's not mine. I wanted to scream at it, tell it to stop messing with me, but my throat felt tight, like something was choking the words back. Before I could react, the planchette moved again, this time slower, more deliberate. STOLEN, I swear. The second it spelled that out, that crying sound got louder. It wasn't faint anymore. It was clearer, sharper, like whatever was making that noise was now just outside the room. The wailing was rising, like a newborn screaming its lungs out. Tara covered her ears, shaking her head, and whispered, "I don't like this. I don't like this." She looked like she was on the verge of tears. Jake was shaking too, the flashlight trembling in his hand, casting jerky shadows on the walls. Mark was the one who freaked me out the most. He was staring at the board with this wide-eyed look, like he was reading something none of us could see. And then, in a voice that barely sounded like his own, he said, "It's not done." Before we could ask him what the hell that meant, the crying, whatever it was, stopped. Silence. Pure, ringing silence. I don't know if you've ever experienced silence that feels too heavy, like the air is pushing down on you. That's what it was like. Everything in that room felt wrong, oppressive. We sat there in the dark, the only light coming from Jake's shaking phone, our hands still stuck to the board, just waiting for something worse. And it didn't take long. The planchette, still moving on its own, began spelling out something else. RUN. We didn't need to be told twice. Whatever force had been holding our hands to the board let go all at once. We shoved the board away from us, practically knocking over the table in the process. Jake dropped his phone, and the light went out again, plunging us into pitch black. In the darkness, I heard someone moving, someone running for the door. I didn't wait to figure out who it was. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed Jake's phone off the floor, and bolted out of that room. We all rushed out of Jake's house like the place was on fire. No one said a word until we were outside, standing under the dim glow of the streetlights. Tara was sobbing, leaning on Jake, who looked just as shaken. Mark was pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, but I couldn't make out the words. Me? I was trying to process what the hell had just happened. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. It was from Emily. I heard crying in the house. "Is everything okay? I'm scared." I didn't know what to say. How could I explain to her that I'd heard it too, but I was miles away? How could I tell her that I'd just been told, by something I couldn't even begin to understand, that our child wasn't ours? After getting that text from Emily, I felt like someone had just punched me in the gut. The kind of fear I felt wasn't just some cheap horror movie jump scare, it was real. The fact that she had heard the crying too, in our house, while I was miles away with the Ouija board spelling out things that didn't make sense. It was too much. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to come together in the worst way possible. I stood there, under the dim streetlight, phone gripped tight in my hand, staring at the screen like it could somehow give me answers. Jake was pacing back and forth next to me, muttering things under his breath, while Tara sat on the curb, still sobbing quietly. Mark. He was off to the side, weirdly quiet, staring at nothing. His eyes were wide, and his lips were moving, but no sound came out. He looked lost, like he'd just seen something that shattered him inside. I knew I had to call Emily. She was pregnant and scared, and I had no idea what to say. My fingers hovered over the call button for a second, my brain racing with excuses. Maybe I'd tell her it was nothing, just some freaky coincidence. Maybe I'd brush it off as a prank. But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to work. Something real had happened. I hit call. She picked up on the first ring. "Babe!" Her voice was shaky, panicked. "What's going on?" "I heard crying in the house. It woke me up. I thought it was coming from outside at first, but..." It was in the room with me. I swear it was right there. That's when I heard it again, through the phone. That faint, eerie wailing in the background, like it was coming from Emily's side of the call. It was unmistakable. The same crying we'd heard back at Jake's house, only this time, it wasn't distant. It was right there, inside my home. "Emily, listen to me," I said, my voice cracking. "I need you to get out of the house, right now. Go to your mum's or get in the car and drive. Just don't stay there." She hesitated. "Why? What's happening? You're freaking me out." "I'll explain everything, I swear. Just trust me. Please, Emily, just go." I was practically shouting, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. She was still on the other end, still trying to make sense of what I was saying. But I could hear it. The crying, growing louder. Then it stopped. Dead silence. And Emily whispered, "Oh my God." "What? What is it?" It's coming from the nursery." I felt like my body had turned to stone. The nursery. The room we'd barely just started setting up for the baby. We hadn't even painted the walls yet, just a crib and a few baby things scattered around. The crib was empty. Emily wasn't due for months, but something was in there. "Get out of the house," I repeated, barely able to control my voice. "Now." I heard footsteps, quick and unsteady, as Emily moved through the house, probably grabbing her keys or coat or something. But then she stopped. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Emily!" I called out, panic creeping back into my voice. "Emily, are you there?" She didn't respond. I could hear her breathing, shallow and fast, like she was trying to hold it in. Then, in a voice so quiet I could barely hear her, she whispered, "There's someone in the nursery." My whole body went cold. "What do you mean? What do you see?" "It's standing by the crib. It's just standing there." I didn't know what to say. My brain was screaming at me to do something, anything, but I was miles away, completely helpless. My wife was standing in our house, in the dark, staring at something in the nursery, and I couldn't be there to help her. "Emily," I whispered, trying to keep my voice calm. "I need you to walk out of the house. Don't look at it. Don't make a sound. Just go, okay? Go." For a moment, I didn't think she would move. I could hear her breathing, ragged and terrified. Then finally she whispered, "It's gone." I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. "It's just gone," she continued, her voice shaking. I blinked and it's not there anymore, but I felt it. It was watching me. That was enough. I told her to get out immediately, and this time she listened. I heard the front door open and close, the familiar click of her locking the door behind her. She was in the car, safe for now. "Okay, I'm out," she said, her voice still trembling. "Where are you?" "I'm coming to you." "Go to your mum's," I told her, my voice firm. "Just stay there for the night, all right? I'll meet you there later." I ended the call, staring blankly at the phone for a few seconds. My heart was still racing, but at least she was out of the house. I had no idea what was happening, but it was becoming clearer by the minute that this was way beyond just a spooky Ouija board prank. Something had attached itself to us, or worse, to our baby. I looked at the others, trying to figure out what to do next. Jake and Tara were still rattled, but Mark was different. He wasn't scared anymore. He was focused, like he was piecing something together in his head. He looked up at me, eyes wide but sharp. "It's not done," he said, repeating the same phrase he'd said back in the house. "This thing, it's not done with you, man. It's attached now." "Attached?" I asked, not sure I wanted to hear the answer. He nodded, stepping closer. "It's connected to your baby. Whatever we let in back there, it's feeding off that. You asked about the future, about your kid, and now it's got a hold of something." His eyes darted around, like he was searching for the right words. "It's like an open invitation. We messed up." I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "So what do I do?" Mark looked at me, dead serious. We have to go back. We have to finish what we started. I didn't want to hear it. The idea of going back into that house, back to the board, was the last thing I wanted to do. But I knew Mark was right. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't done with us. And if I didn't stop it, I wasn't sure what would happen next. I looked down at my phone again, the text from Emily still open. Before. The words flashed in my head, haunting me. The board had warned me, but I still didn't know what it meant. But one thing was clear. It was coming for my child, and it wasn't going to stop until it had whatever it wanted. I looked at the others. Let's go back. We drove back to Jake's house in silence. The weight of what we were about to do hung in the air like a thick fog. My hands were slick on the steering wheel and I kept glancing at my phone, hoping for another message from Emily. Anything to let me know she was okay. But there was nothing. I pulled up in front of Jake's house, the headlights casting eerie shadows on the front lawn. The house itself seemed darker than before, like it knew we were coming back. I could feel the tension in the car as we sat there for a moment, no one wanting to be the first to move. Mark finally broke the silence. We finish this now, or it doesn't stop. Whatever we did, whatever we opened, it's not going to let go on its own. Jake swallowed hard, his eyes wide and scared, but he nodded. Tara, who had been silent the whole ride, whispered, "Do we even know how to stop it?" Mark didn't answer, and that scared me more than anything. We stepped out of the car and made our way back inside. The house felt colder, emptier than before. The shadows seemed longer, stretching out across the floor like something was waiting for us in them. Every step we took toward the living room felt like walking into the jaws of some invisible monster, but there was no turning back now. The Ouija board was still there, on the floor where we'd shoved it earlier. The planchette lay in the center, motionless. But the room felt charged, like the air itself was buzzing with energy. I didn't want to sit back down around that thing, but I had no choice. We all sat in the same places, though this time the atmosphere wasn't jokey or casual. It was like we were preparing for a war we couldn't see. Jake lit the candles again, the flickering flames casting those same unsettling shadows across our faces. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. I had no idea what we were doing, what we were up against, but I knew I had to see it through. I couldn't let whatever this was take my child. Mark placed his hands on the planchette first, looking at the rest of us. "Same as before," he said, his voice low. "We ask it what it wants, then we close it. This time, for good." Reluctantly, I put my hands back on the board. I could feel the same cold, vibrating sensation beneath my fingers, but this time it wasn't subtle. It was like touching something alive, something angry. Tara and Jake did the same, their faces pale and tense. Mark was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from us?" For a second, nothing happened. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint crackling of the candle wicks. But then, the planchette began to move. F-A-M-I-L-Y. My stomach dropped. I knew what it was saying, but I didn't want to believe it. Family, my unborn child. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why are you doing this?" The planchette stopped, as if considering my question. Then, it began moving again, faster this time. S-T-O-L-E-N. That word, again. Stolen. My throat tightened and my mind raced with questions. What did it mean by stolen? Was it talking about my child? Had something already happened? Was something wrong with the baby? Mark's face went pale as he stared at the board. It thinks the baby belongs to it. Tara let out a soft sob, her hands trembling on the board. "This is insane. We need to stop. We need to end this." But I couldn't stop. Not yet. "How do I make it stop?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What do I need to do?" The planchette moved again, slow and deliberate this time. G-I-V-E. "Give what?" I demanded, my fear turning to anger. What do you want from me?" The board didn't hesitate. THECHILD. The room went deathly silent, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. I could feel everyone around me tense up, but all I could do was stare at the board, my mind blank with disbelief. It wanted my child. That's what it had been saying all along. That's what before 2:05 meant, before the baby was born. It was trying to claim it before it even had a chance to enter this world. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You can't have it." The planchette jerked violently under our hands, faster than before, spelling out its message with terrifying speed. MINE, I pulled my hands away from the board, my heart hammering in my chest. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't going to stop. It had latched onto us, and it wasn't going to let go without a fight. Mark's face was pale, sweat dripping down his forehead. "We have to close it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Now." Jake nodded, but Tara was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. "What if it doesn't let us close it?" Mark didn't answer, but I could see in his eyes that he wasn't sure we could. I didn't care. I couldn't let this thing win. I couldn't let it take my child. Without thinking, I grabbed the board and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a loud crack, the planchette skidding across the floor. But the second it left my hands, the air in the room seemed to change. The candles flickered violently, and that crying sound, the one we'd heard earlier, started up again, louder this time. It wasn't faint anymore. It was right there with us, filling the room, echoing off the walls. It was so loud, so sharp, that it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. I clapped my hands over my ears, trying to block it out, but it was no use. The sound was everywhere, suffocating, relentless. Tara screamed, and I could hear Jake shouting something, but the crying drowned everything out. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The room fell into an eerie, oppressive silence. The candles had gone out, plunging us into darkness. But the oppressive weight that had been in the room, whatever force had been pushing against us, was gone. I stood there, panting, trying to catch my breath. The board was lying in pieces across the floor, shattered from where it had hit the wall. The planchette was broken in half. Mark was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. Did we stop it?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. All I knew was that the room felt different, empty. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and dialed Emily's number. It rang once, twice, then, "Hello?" Her voice, calm, safe. "Emily," I croaked. "Are you okay? Is everything okay?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm at my mom's." The crying stopped. I closed my eyes, relief flooding through me. "Good. Stay there tonight. I'll come get you in the morning." We left Jake's house not long after that. No one said a word as we walked out. No one wanted to. Whatever had happened in that room, whatever we had let in, I didn't care anymore. It was over. At least, that's what I thought. But as I climbed into bed that night, exhausted and drained, I reached for my phone to check the time. And that's when I saw it. A single text. It wasn't from Emily. It was from an unknown number. 3 simple words that chilled me to my core. "See you soon." The Ouija board. Said it wasn't my friend. But they haven't been the same since we played. This all started last summer. I swear, if I had known things would get this weird, I would have never gone to that party. Honestly, I wouldn't have even answered the text, but it came from Ethan, one of my closest friends. You know how it goes. Small gathering, some drinks, and everyone's just trying to escape the boredom of a small town summer. It was the last night before college was starting up again, and we were all feeling that weird mix of excitement and dread. Ethan, Sarah, Mia, and I had been friends since high school, so it felt like we were holding on to something that was slipping away. Ethan's parents were out of town, and his place was the usual spot for dumb ideas and bad decisions. So when he invited us over for one last night of good times, it was an easy yes. Now, Ethan's always been into weird stuff. Like, he's the kind of guy who'd show you those cursed videos on YouTube at 3 a.m. and laugh while you freak out. You know, just for fun. But that night, he upped the ante. He pulled out an old dusty Ouija board. The thing looked ancient, like he found it in some abandoned attic or something. I asked where he got it, but he just shrugged and said it was from a thrift store. Knowing him, he probably found it online in some sketchy forum. At first, we all laughed it off. I mean, come on, a Ouija board? The last time I touched one of those, I was 12, and even then, it was a joke. But Ethan was serious. He got this weird look in his eyes, like he needed us to do it. He kept saying, "Come on, just one last time, for old time's sake." Mia was hesitant though. She's always been the cautious one, the skeptic, and she didn't like the idea of messing with something that could be real. But after some pressure and a couple of drinks, she finally gave in. The four of us sat around Ethan's coffee table, the board in the centre, with just the dim light from a few candles flickering around us. Yeah, I know, classic horror movie setup. But we were all feeling a bit reckless, and besides, none of us believed anything would actually happen. We placed our fingers on the planchette. Sarah, who'd always been the wild card in our group, started asking questions right away. Basic stuff like, "Is anyone here?" and "What's your name?" Typical things you'd expect from a bad ghost hunting show. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. I was about to pull my hand away and call it quits when the planchette jerked under our fingers. It wasn't a smooth glide either, like one of us was messing around. It felt like someone, or something, had yanked it. We all froze and looked at each other. Ethan smirked, thinking one of us was pulling a prank, but Mia's face had gone pale. "Who's doing that?" she whispered. No one answered. I wasn't about to admit it, but I could tell none of us were moving it. The planchette moved again, this time slower, almost like it was dragging itself across the board. It spelled out IAMHERE. Ethan grinned, probably still thinking it was some kind of joke. Okay, very funny," he said, but I could hear the slight tremor in his voice. Mia pulled her hand away. "This isn't funny anymore, Ethan," she said, glaring at him. "You're seriously creeping me out." But then the planchette moved again, fast, so fast that I thought it was going to fly off the board. We weren't even touching it anymore, just staring at it in disbelief. It spelled out 3 words that sent a chill down my spine. "He is watching." At that point, Sarah laughed, but it was that nervous, high-pitched laugh that people do when they're trying to convince themselves they're not scared. "Okay, game's over," she said, pushing the board away. Ethan wasn't laughing anymore, though. He looked genuinely freaked out. He tried to laugh it off, but his hands were shaking as he stood up and grabbed another drink from the kitchen. "Just some stupid board," he muttered, but he wasn't convincing anyone. I don't know what came over me, but I asked the one question you're never supposed to ask when playing with a Ouija board. You're supposed to avoid anything too personal, anything that might actually invite something, well, real. But I was scared, and the fear made me reckless. "Who's watching us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The planchette didn't move right away, but when it did, it was slow, deliberate. It spelled out FRIEND. A chill ran down my spine. Friend? What the hell did that mean? Sarah looked at me with wide eyes, and Mia shook her head, standing up to leave. "Nope. I'm out," she said, grabbing her bag. "I'm not staying here for this." Ethan tried to calm us down, but I could see it in his face. He was just as freaked out as we were. We packed up the board, blew out the candles, and spent the rest of the night trying to pretend it didn't happen. But here's the thing. After that night, things didn't go back to normal. Not for Ethan, not for any of us. It didn't hit me right away. After that night, I tried to brush everything off as a bad joke, maybe just nerves getting the better of us. But a few days later, I noticed something off. It started with Ethan. Normally, we'd text or hang out pretty regularly, especially since classes hadn't started yet. But after the Ouija board thing, he went quiet. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just busy or dealing with his own stuff. But it was more than that. He wasn't answering my texts, and whenever I called, it went straight to voicemail. I figured I'd just stop by his place, maybe see if he wanted to grab something to eat or just chill. When I got there, though, the vibe was weird. You know how sometimes you can just feel when something's off? His house had that energy. I could see his car in the driveway, but when I knocked on the door, no answer. I knocked again, louder, thinking maybe he was in the shower or something. Still nothing. I was about to leave when the door cracked open, just a sliver, like someone was peeking out. It was dark inside, like he hadn't opened the curtains in days, but I could barely make out Ethan standing there. His face was half in shadow, but from what I could see, he looked tired. More than tired. He looked hollow. His eyes were sunken, with dark circles like he hadn't slept in days. His skin had this pale, almost greyish tint, and he was sweating, like he'd just run a marathon. "Ethan?" I asked, trying not to sound freaked out. "Dude, you good? You haven't been answering anyone." He opened the door a bit wider, but not by much. He was holding it with one hand, like he didn't want me to see inside. "Yeah, man, I'm fine," he said, his voice weirdly flat. "Just been busy." I raised an eyebrow. "Busy doing what? You're not even packed for school yet, dude." He didn't answer, just kind of stared at me like he was trying to figure something out. I could feel my stomach twisting with that weird kind of anxiety you get when you know something's wrong, but don't want to admit it. "Look," I said, trying to keep things casual, "let's just grab some food or something. Sarah and Mia are worried about you." At the mention of Mia's name, something shifted in his expression. His eyes flickered, just for a second, but I swear I saw something. Fear, anger. I couldn't tell, but then it was gone, and he shook his head. "Nah, I'm good. Maybe later." He started to close the door, but I put my foot in the way. I don't know why I did it, but I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. "What happened that night?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "After the Ouija board, you've been acting weird, man." Ethan's face went blank, and he stared at me for what felt like forever. Then, in a low voice, barely above a whisper, he said, "I don't think it's over." "What's not over?" I asked, my chest tightening. "The game," he said, his voice trembling. "It's still here." I was about to ask him what the hell he meant by that, when a loud thump echoed from somewhere inside his house. Ethan jumped, his eyes darting toward the hallway behind him. His hand tightened on the door, and for the first time in the years I'd known him, I saw real fear in his face. "I gotta go," he mumbled, and before I could say anything, he slammed the door in my face. I stood there for a few minutes, my heart pounding in my chest, just staring at his door. There was something in his house, something he wasn't telling me about, and I had no idea what to do about it. That night, I tried to text Sarah and Mia to see if they'd heard from Ethan, but neither of them had. Mia didn't seem too concerned. She was already halfway checked out from the whole thing, convinced it was just Ethan being his usual dramatic self. But Sarah, she was different. She called me that night, sounding a bit on edge. "I've been feeling weird," she said. "Ever since that night, I don't know, like someone's watching me." At first I thought she was just being paranoid. I mean, we'd all been freaked out by the Ouija board, but we were probably just psyching ourselves out, right? Still, there was something about the way she said it, something in her voice that made me uneasy. "What do you mean, watching?" I asked, leaning back on my bed, trying to calm my own nerves. Sarah hesitated. "I don't know how to explain it. I keep seeing something, out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was my imagination, you know? But it's been happening more. Every time I turn around, it's gone. But I swear, there's something there. I tried to reassure her, telling her it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But I wasn't even convincing myself at that point. I hadn't told her about Ethan yet. I didn't want to freak her out more. But now, I was starting to wonder if maybe we'd all been messed up in some way that night. After we hung up, I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about what Ethan had said. It's still here. What did he mean? Was he talking about the spirit we supposedly contacted, or something else entirely? I rolled over, pulling the covers up to my chin, but sleep wouldn't come. Every little noise in the house made me jump. Creaks, the hum of the fridge, even the faint sound of wind outside. It all felt wrong, like there was something just beyond the edge of my vision, waiting. Around 3 a.m., I heard a knock at my window. It was soft, barely audible, but it made my heart stop. I sat up in bed, my eyes glued to the window across the room. My curtains were half open, and in the dim light from the street lamp outside, I could see the silhouette of a figure standing just outside the glass. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe it was Ethan, playing some kind of messed up prank. But the longer I stared, the more I realized this thing was too tall. Its head was nearly touching the top of the window, and its body was all wrong. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't anyone. The knocking came again. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I wanted to move, to grab my phone, to do something, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, just sitting there, watching this shadowy figure stare at me through the glass. Then, in the silence, I heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable. Friend. I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the figure outside my window, and my whole body was frozen in fear. The word, friend, echoed in my head, chilling me to the core. It wasn't the voice of anyone I knew. It was something darker, something colder. And then, just like that, the figure was gone. I don't remember how long I sat there staring at the window. It could have been seconds, could have been hours, but eventually, I scrambled for my phone and texted Ethan. "Are you messing with me?" I sent. I knew it wasn't him, but I had to tell myself something, anything to make this feel normal. The minutes dragged on without a response. I checked my door to make sure it was locked, double-checked the windows, and kept the lights on. Sleep? That was impossible now. The next morning, I decided to go see Sarah. She was already on edge from our last conversation, and after what I'd seen, I needed to know if she'd experienced anything else. I hadn't heard from Ethan all night, and part of me hoped maybe he'd gone to check on her too. Maybe I'd show up, and we'd all laugh about how freaked out we were getting. When I got to her apartment, something was immediately off. Her blinds were drawn tight, not even a sliver of sunlight coming through. Sarah was the type who loved natural light, always keeping her windows wide open. But today, her place was dark, almost suffocating. I knocked, and after a long pause, she opened the door just a crack, just like Ethan had. Her face was pale, her eyes bloodshot like she hadn't slept all night. "Sarah?" I asked, stepping forward, but she didn't open the door any wider. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice shaky. "What are you talking about? We need to talk about what's going on," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Have you heard from Ethan? He's been... I don't want to talk about it." She cut me off, shaking her head violently. I don't think it's safe to talk about it." "Safe?" I repeated, the word making my stomach drop. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" She opened the door a little wider and I could see inside. Her apartment was a mess, clothes thrown everywhere, mirrors covered with blankets like she didn't want to see herself. Or maybe didn't want to see something else looking back at her. "It's here," she whispered, her voice so low I barely heard her. "What's here?" I asked, stepping inside despite every instinct telling me to stay far, far away. "I don't know," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But it's watching. It's always watching." Her eyes darted to the window, and I noticed the curtains had been pinned shut, like she was afraid they might move on their own. "Last night, I saw something. I thought it was just a dream, but then—" She trailed off, her face twisting in fear. "Sarah, you're scaring me. What did you see?" She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "It looked like Ethan, outside my window. But when I opened the door, no one was there. Then I heard him whispering. He said the same thing it told us that night. He is watching." My blood ran cold. She had seen the same thing I had, or something similar. "I saw someone too," I confessed, "outside my window. But it wasn't Ethan. It wasn't human." Sarah's face went even paler, and she sat down heavily on the couch, her hands clutching her knees. "It's not over, is it?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "We let something in." "I don't know," I admitted. "But we need to figure this out." She shook her head, refusing to meet my eyes. "I don't think there's anything we can do. I've been hearing things in my apartment. Footsteps at night. And when I look, there's no one there. But I know something's here. And it's getting worse." I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't just her. Ever since that night, things had been off for me too. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was watching from just out of sight. And no matter where I went, I couldn't shake that creeping sensation. As we sat in silence, her phone buzzed on the table, making us both jump. Sarah grabbed it, her hands shaking, and looked at the screen. She went pale, even more than before. "It's from Ethan," she whispered. She handed me the phone, and my stomach dropped. The message was short, just 2 words. "Help me." I dialed his number immediately, but there was no answer. I tried again. Nothing. The air in Sarah's apartment felt thick with tension, and I knew we couldn't just sit there and wait for whatever was happening to get worse. "We need to go to his house," I said, standing up. "Now." Sarah didn't argue. She grabbed her keys, and within minutes, we were in my car, speeding toward Ethan's place. I kept trying to call him on the way there, but every time it went straight to voicemail. By the time we pulled up to his house, my heart was racing. The sun was still up, but Ethan's house felt wrong. The windows were dark, and the front door was slightly ajar, swaying in the wind. Something about it made my skin crawl. "Stay here," I told Sarah, but she shook her head. "No way, I'm not staying alone." We got out of the car together and slowly made our way to the door. I pushed it open, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was like something had gone stale, like the air inside had been sitting too long. "Ethan!" I called out, my voice echoing through the house. No answer. We stepped inside, the floor creaking under our feet. The living room was empty, but the Ouija board was still there, lying on the coffee table like we'd left it that night. I could have sworn we'd packed it away, but here it was, as if waiting for us. As we moved deeper into the house, the feeling of being watched intensified. I could feel eyes on me, cold and unblinking. Suddenly Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I listened, and there it was, barely audible, but unmistakable. A faint, rhythmic tapping coming from upstairs. It was slow, deliberate, like someone, or something, was knocking on a door over and over. I motioned for Sarah to stay behind me, and we slowly made our way up the stairs, the tapping growing louder with each step. When we reached the landing, it stopped. Ethan's bedroom door was at the end of the hall, slightly ajar. Light spilled out from underneath it, flickering like a candle in the wind. "Ethan!" I called out again, my voice shaky. No response. I pushed the door open, and there, sitting in the center of the room, was Ethan. His back was to us, and he was staring at something on the floor in front of him. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't explain. "Ethan," I said, stepping closer. "What's going on? Are you okay?" He didn't move. I reached out, my hand trembling, and lightly touched his shoulder. He turned his head slowly, his eyes wide and unblinking, his face drained of color. But it wasn't Ethan. Not anymore. I froze. The person sitting in front of me looked like Ethan, but the moment he turned his head, I knew. Whatever I was looking at, it wasn't him. His eyes were wide, too wide, the whites visible all around like he hadn't blinked in hours. His pupils were dilated, almost swallowing the color from his irises, and his skin was pale, stretched tight over his face like he'd been drained of life. But what sent a shiver down my spine wasn't how he looked. It was how he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too slow, too deliberate, like he was mimicking something he didn't understand. His lips curled up in a way that didn't belong on any human face, revealing teeth clenched so tightly I could hear the faint grinding noise they made. Behind me, Sarah gasped, her hand covering her mouth. I wanted to move, to run, but I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at him as my heart pounded in my chest. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What happened to you?" The thing wearing Ethan's face tilted its head, its smile growing wider. Then, in a voice that sounded like Ethan's but didn't quite match, like it was being played through an old broken radio, it said, "He's not here anymore." I felt Sarah grip my arm tighter, and I could hear her breath quickening, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. "What do you mean he's not here?" I managed to choke out. The thing's head jerked slightly, like it was trying to shake off the question, and its eyes flicked to the floor in front of it. Only then did I notice the chalk. A thick, jagged circle was drawn on the floor, surrounding Ethan, or whatever this was. Symbols and shapes I didn't recognize were scrawled within the circle, some of them smeared as if they'd been drawn over and over again. In the center of the circle, just in front of Ethan's feet, was the Ouija board. It was still set up, planchette resting in the middle, but the board itself looked different. The letters had darkened, like they'd been burned into the wood, and the once faded symbols around the edges were now vivid, glowing faintly in the dim light of the room. Did you use it again?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The thing that looked like Ethan didn't respond, but its eyes slowly moved to meet hers, and that grotesque smile never wavered. Then, without warning, the lights in the room flickered, plunging us into near darkness. My heart raced, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. "Ethan!" I shouted, taking a step back. "What did you do?" He, or it, began to laugh. A low, guttural sound that didn't belong to him. The laugh started soft, but it grew louder, filling the room until it felt like it was coming from the walls, the floor, the air around us. It echoed, bouncing off the walls in a way that made my skin crawl. Then he spoke again, but this time, his voice was different. It was deeper, layered with something inhuman. "I told you, he's not here anymore." The smile widened, stretching his face unnaturally. His eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, and the air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing in on us like we were being suffocated by an invisible weight. I could feel it then. Something else. Something dark. Something wrong. It wasn't just Ethan that was gone. There was a presence in the room, a cold, oppressive force that made it hard to breathe. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath in front of me, white mist hanging in the air. The symbols on the floor began to glow brighter, pulsing in time with the flickering lights. "We need to leave," Sarah whispered, tugging on my arm. "We need to get out of here. Now." I didn't need convincing. I backed away from Ethan, or whatever was left of him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. But as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang, the force of it shaking the walls. "Sarah, run!" I shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the door. We reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it had been welded shut, sealed by something unseen. Behind us, that laugh started again, louder this time, more twisted. I turned back, and Ethan, or the thing pretending to be Ethan, was on his feet now, slowly stepping out of the circle, one foot dragging behind him in a way that made me sick to my stomach. "He's watching," it said, in that same broken, distorted voice. "He's always watching." The lights flickered again, and in the split second of darkness, I saw it. A figure looming in the corner of the room. Tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its form was shadowy, its features obscured, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. Sarah screamed, and I felt her nails dig into my arm. We pounded on the door, desperate, but it didn't open. The thing behind us was getting closer, its footsteps slow and deliberate, like it was savoring every second of our fear. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The lights flickered one last time and stayed on. The room was empty. No Ethan, no figure in the corner. Just silence. I don't know how long we stood there, our backs against the door, hearts racing. But eventually, the door creaked open on its own, and we stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air like we'd just surfaced from drowning. We ran. We didn't stop until we were outside, the cold air hitting our faces like a slap. I looked back at the house, expecting to see something, anything, moving in the windows. But it was quiet, still, as if nothing had happened. Sarah was shaking next to me, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? Nothing made sense anymore. Nothing felt real. But as we stood there, trying to catch our breath, I realized something. We hadn't escaped. Not really. Whatever we had let in that night, whatever had answered us through that board, it was still with us, and it wasn't going to leave. Sarah spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we had opened a door we shouldn't have, and now it wasn't just Ethan that was gone. It was all of us. I found an old Ouija board in the attic. It knew things about my family I was never told. All right, so this all started about 2 months ago, and I still don't have all the answers. But I'm going to try to break it down as clearly as I can, because things have gotten weird. Like, really weird. I honestly feel like I'm losing it, but maybe you all can help me figure this out. So, my family isn't anything special. We're pretty normal, or at least I thought we were. I live in this old house that's been in our family for generations. It's your typical creaky floorboard, drafty window type of place. You know, the kind of house where every night you hear something settling and convince yourself it's just the wind or the pipes. It's almost cliché, but I never really paid much attention to it growing up. Anyway, my parents went out of town for a couple of weeks, which left me in charge of the house. They were visiting my uncle who lives out in some remote town, and I had the place to myself. At first, I thought it'd be great. Just me, some peace and quiet, no one to bug me about chores or keeping my room clean. Then I got bored. One rainy Saturday afternoon, I was exploring the house, looking for something to do. It was one of those days where the sky stays grey, the rain never lets up, and everything just feels off. I figured maybe I'd finally check out the attic. I'd been up there once or twice as a kid, but it's always been this place where we stored old junk, stuff from my grandparents or great-grandparents. I thought I might find some old comic books or weird vintage stuff to pass the time. The attic is exactly what you'd expect. Dim, dusty, and full of boxes that haven't been touched in decades. The smell was old, like that dry, musty scent you get when you crack open an ancient book. I started digging through boxes, mostly out of boredom, and I found some cool stuff. Old photographs, letters, and this really creepy porcelain doll that I swear moved when I wasn't looking at it, but I chalked that up to my imagination. Just as I was about to give up and head back downstairs, I noticed something sticking out from behind a stack of old furniture in the corner. It was flat, covered in dust, and I could barely make out what it was until I pulled it free. It was an old Ouija board. Now, I'm not talking about one of those cheesy, glow-in-the-dark ones you can buy at a toy store. This thing was old. The wood was faded and scratched, and the letters were worn down. The planchette, that little heart-shaped thing you use to move around the board, looked like it had been used hundreds of times. I don't know why, but I got this chill as soon as I touched it. Not like, oh, I'm spooked by this creepy old object kind of chill. It was more like a shiver that ran down my spine, like my body was telling me I shouldn't be holding it. But being the idiot that I am, I ignored it. I figured it'd be fun to mess around with. You always hear those stories about people contacting spirits, right? I didn't really believe in that stuff, but I thought it might be cool to see if anything would happen. Worst case, I'd freak myself out a little and have a weird story to tell my friends later. I took the board downstairs and set it up in the living room. The rain was still tapping against the windows, and the house felt colder than it should have, but I ignored it and got everything ready. I sat down, placed my fingers on the planchette, and said the usual line you hear in every ghost movie ever. Is anyone there? Nothing happened, obviously. I laughed at myself and was about to put the thing away when I thought of a better question. Did someone in my family use this board? This time, the planchette moved. At first, I thought it was just me. Maybe my hand was twitching or something. But it moved to yes. I sat there, frozen, staring at the board. I wasn't touching it anymore. The planchette just sat there on yes, like it was waiting for me to ask something else. I wasn't scared, not yet at least. Mostly, I was just confused. I figured there had to be some logical explanation, like maybe it was the way I had been leaning on the table, and I had caused it to move without realizing it. But then, I asked the next question. Who are you? The planchette didn't move for a second, but when it did, it spelled out something I never expected. GRANDMA. I stared at the board for what felt like forever, trying to process what I had just seen. My grandma, my dad's mum, died when I was 8. I didn't remember much about her, except that she always smelled like lavender and used to give me these butterscotch candies that I hated but took anyway because, I was a kid. And that's what you do. I leaned in closer to the board, my mind racing, but also kind of fascinated. Maybe there was something to this after all. Maybe it was just my subconscious or something, but at that moment I didn't care. Grandma, I whispered, is it really you? The planchette moved again, this time slower, more deliberate. Yes, I should have stopped there, I really should have. But instead, I asked one more question. What do you want? The planchette didn't move for a long time. I thought maybe the session was over, or maybe I had been imagining it all along. But then, finally, it started moving. LOOKUPSTAIRS. I immediately got that feeling again, that cold chill down my back. But it was too late to stop. I was in too deep now. I had no idea what I'd find upstairs, but I knew I wasn't going to ignore the message. And that's when things started getting really strange. Okay, so after that weird session with the Ouija board, I wasn't really sure what to do. I mean, the board spelled out, look upstairs. But here's the thing. I was already kind of upstairs. The living room is on the second floor of our house, so technically, there was only the attic above me, and I'd just come from there. The idea of going back up to that dark, cramped space again wasn't exactly appealing, especially after what had just happened. But of course I couldn't just ignore it. I wish I had. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. The hallway was dead quiet, and the only sound was the faint rain still tapping against the windows. The shadows felt off. You know when you're alone in a room, and you feel like someone's watching you, but when you turn around, there's nothing there. Yeah, it was like that. I made my way to the stairs that led to the attic. It's this narrow, creaky wooden staircase that pulls down from the ceiling, like something out of an old horror movie. Every step felt heavier than the last. By the time I reached the top, my heart was pounding, and not because I was scared. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The attic looked exactly the same as when I left it. Boxes piled high, old furniture covered in dust, and that smell, like time had just stopped up here. I shined my light around, half expecting to see something I missed earlier, but everything was still the same. I called out softly, almost feeling stupid for doing it. "Grandma, are you here?" Nothing, just the faint hum of the rain outside. I was about to turn around and head back downstairs, convinced that I was just psyching myself out, when I heard it. A whisper. It was so soft. I thought I imagined it at first, but then I heard it again. This time it was clearer, though I couldn't make out the words. It was coming from behind a stack of old trunks near the far corner of the attic. I froze. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Every rational part of me was screaming to leave, but there was something else, some deep gut feeling that kept me from running. I slowly stepped toward the corner, my flashlight beam shaking as I tried to stay calm. That's when I saw it. One of the trunks, the one at the bottom of the stack, was slightly open, not by much, just enough that I could see a sliver of darkness inside. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed intentional, like it was waiting for me. I knelt down, hesitated for a second, and then pried the lid open the rest of the way. Inside, wrapped in layers of dusty old fabric, was an envelope. Just a plain, yellowed envelope with my dad's name written on it in neat, faded handwriting. But here's the thing. It wasn't his full name. It was a nickname, one only my grandma used to call him. Tommy. Now, that might not seem weird at first, but I've never seen anyone else call my dad that. It was something just between him and my grandma. I stared at the envelope, trying to piece together why it was hidden up here in an old trunk. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The letter inside was old, probably decades old. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble if I wasn't careful. As I unfolded it, my heart sank. I wasn't sure what I expected, but the first line hit me like a punch to the gut. "Tommy, there's something you need to know before it's too late." The handwriting was definitely my grandma's. I could feel a knot forming in my stomach as I kept reading. "Our family, it's not what you think. There's something dark, something we've hidden for a long time. It's why I left the house to you, why I never spoke about your grandfather. There are things in this house, secrets, that should have stayed buried. But I'm afraid it's too late now. They've been watching." I had to stop for a second, my hands shaking as I processed what I'd just read. Secrets, things watching. It didn't make sense, but at the same time, it felt too real. "If you found this letter, you need to leave. Get as far away from this place as you can. There are things you don't know about your father's death and about me. I'm sorry, Tommy. I love you, but I couldn't protect you from this." That's where the letter ended. No signature, nothing else. I just sat there in the attic, staring at the paper, trying to piece together what I'd just read. My dad's death. My family. What the hell was going on? Then I heard the whisper again. This time it was louder, clearer. It was right behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but there was nothing there, just shadows and dust. But the air felt different, heavier, almost like the attic itself was watching me. I didn't stay to find out more. I bolted down the stairs, my heart racing. As soon as I reached the bottom, I slammed the attic door shut and pulled the cord to retract the stairs. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing heavily, trying to shake off the overwhelming sense that something had been in that attic with me. Something that didn't want me to find that letter. I don't know why, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy the Ouija board. I just shoved it under the couch and decided I'd deal with it later. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whisper, felt the weight of something standing at the foot of my bed, watching, waiting. I kept thinking about that letter. What had my grandma been so afraid of? What didn't I know about my family? And most importantly, what was watching me? When I woke up the next morning, I thought maybe it had all been a bad dream, that I'd just let my imagination get the best of me. But then I saw the envelope, still sitting on my nightstand. And that's when I noticed something new, written in the same handwriting as before, but this time in fresh ink, was a single word on the back of the envelope. Downstairs. The next morning, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at that single word scrawled on the back of the envelope. Downstairs. I could feel the blood drain from my face as a creeping sense of dread settled in my chest. It was fresh ink. No way was it there the night before. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I just didn't notice it earlier. Maybe I was tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew there was no logical explanation for this. I hadn't touched a pen since I found the letter, and there was no one else in the house. The rain had stopped, but the overcast sky still cast the house in this dull, lifeless grey. The air felt heavier, like it was harder to breathe. I kept replaying the events of the past day over and over in my head, finding the Ouija board, the message from Grandma, the letter, the whispering, and now this. Downstairs. I don't know why, but the idea of going down to the basement filled me with a kind of fear I hadn't felt before. I've been in that basement 100 times. It's just a basement, right? Just dusty old shelves, a couple of boxes, the water heater. Nothing out of the ordinary. But today, it felt different. It was like the house was alive, pulsing with something dark that I couldn't quite explain. Still, I couldn't just ignore it. I knew I had to go. There was this pull, like an invisible thread guiding me toward whatever was waiting for me down there. I grabbed my flashlight again, though this time I made sure it had fresh batteries. I wasn't going to risk anything flickering out on me. The basement door was at the end of the hallway, right next to the kitchen. As I approached, I could feel the cold radiating from it, even though the door was shut. I hesitated for a moment, hand on the doorknob, before I finally forced myself to turn it. The door creaked open, revealing the wooden staircase that led down into the basement. Everything looked normal at first, just the same old steps leading into the same old darkness. But something felt off, like there was something just out of sight, waiting in the shadows. I flipped the light switch at the top of the stairs, and nothing happened. Of course. Great, I muttered to myself. Just great. I didn't have a choice. I clicked on my flashlight, took a deep breath, and started down the stairs. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, and each one felt like it might collapse any second. As I reached the bottom, the air grew colder, and the familiar musty smell of the basement hit me. Everything looked normal at first. The shelves were there, stacked with old jars and boxes. The water heater hummed in the corner. But then I noticed something strange. There was a door. Now, before you think I'm crazy, let me explain. This door wasn't there before. I've lived in this house my whole life, and there's never been a door down here. It was small, almost like it had been built for someone shorter, and it blended into the concrete wall, almost invisible. If I hadn't been looking directly at it, I might have missed it entirely. My heart started pounding in my chest, a mix of fear and curiosity taking over. I approached the door cautiously, shining my light on it. The wood was dark, old, and there were deep scratches around the edges, like something, or someone, had been clawing at it from the other side. There was no handle, just a keyhole. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why would there be a door in the basement that I'd never noticed before? And why did it feel so wrong? That's when I heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping sound. It was coming from the other side of the door. My stomach dropped. Every instinct told me to turn around and get the hell out of there, but I couldn't. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, like someone, or something, was waiting for me to open the door. I knelt down, bringing my face closer to the keyhole. I don't know why I did it. Curiosity? Stupidity? A mix of both, probably. I peered through the small dark opening, expecting to see nothing but more darkness on the other side. Instead, I saw an eye. My heart skipped a beat, and I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. I could have sworn there was someone, or something, on the other side, staring back at me. But when I looked again, the keyhole was empty. Just darkness. I stood there, shaking, trying to convince myself I hadn't just seen that. But the image of that eye, wide and unblinking, was burned into my brain. Something was on the other side of that door, something that shouldn't be there. I needed to get out of the basement. Now I turned to head back up the stairs, but as I did, I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck. I whipped around, shining my light frantically around the room, but there was nothing. Just empty air. Then, the whispering started again. This time, it wasn't coming from the door. It was all around me, like a chorus of voices speaking in hushed tones, too quiet for me to understand. The basement seemed to darken, the shadows growing longer, deeper, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly trapped. I bolted up the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping as I reached the top. I slammed the basement door shut behind me, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The whispering stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It was thick, oppressive, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something. I didn't go back into the basement that night. I couldn't. I barely slept, lying in bed with my flashlight on, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the next sign, the next whisper, the next something. But nothing came. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I had to talk to my dad. There were too many questions, too many things I didn't understand. The letter, the door, the whispers. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all connected to whatever secrets my grandma had hinted at. But when I picked up my phone to call him, I saw I already had a missed call from him at 3 a.m. The voicemail was only 3 words long. Don't go back. My dad's voicemail kept playing over and over in my head. Don't go back. His voice didn't sound like his usual self. It was shaky, almost panicked. But here's the thing. I hadn't even told him anything yet. How did he know something was happening? How did he know to warn me? I tried calling him back, but the call wouldn't go through. Just static on the other end. I checked my phone for service, Wi-Fi, anything, but the house had gone completely dead. No signal, no internet. I was completely cut off. For a while, I just sat there, staring at the basement door, replaying everything in my head. The Ouija board, the letter from my grandma, the strange door that had appeared, the eye, and now my dad's cryptic warning. It was like pieces of a puzzle that I didn't have all the pieces for. But one thing was clear. I wasn't safe here. I knew I had to leave, just like my grandma's letter had said. But something inside me, maybe stubbornness or maybe just plain stupidity, wouldn't let me go without answers. I couldn't just run. Not yet. Not until I knew what my family had been hiding all these years. There was only one place left to look, the basement. I grabbed my flashlight, but this time, I took a hammer with me too. I don't know what I thought I'd need it for, but it felt better having something in my hand, just in case. The house was silent, except for the sound of my footsteps as I walked back down the hallway toward the basement door. The closer I got, the colder the air became. Not just chilly, bone-chilling, like the kind of cold that settles into your bones and makes you shiver no matter how many layers you have on. I gripped the hammer tighter, trying to steady my nerves. I reached the door, hesitating for a second before opening it again. The stairs leading down into the basement looked darker than before, like the shadows had thickened, waiting for me. I flicked on the flashlight and stepped down, each creak of the steps echoing in the silence. When I reached the bottom, I froze. The door, the one that had appeared the day before, was wide open. My flashlight beam wavered as I stared at the open doorway, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Beyond the door was a tunnel, stretching out into the darkness. The walls were made of rough stone, damp with moisture, and the air smelled of earth and decay. This was no ordinary basement. This had been here a long time, hidden, buried beneath the house. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to step forward to see where the tunnel led. As I moved through the narrow passageway, the whispering started again. It was faint at first, but the deeper I went, the louder it became. I could hear voices, several of them, murmuring things I couldn't quite understand. The air felt thick, oppressive, like something was pressing down on me from all sides. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, but eventually I reached the end. It opened up into a small, circular room, dimly lit by a single, flickering candle that sat in the center. The walls were covered in strange, faded symbols, and in the middle of the floor was a large, stone slab, like a makeshift altar, and lying on the slab was something wrapped in old, tattered cloth. My stomach turned as I approached it, dread pooling in my gut. I didn't want to see what was under the cloth, but I knew I had to. I reached out, hands trembling, and pulled it back. It was a body, or at least what was left of one. The bones were old, yellowed with age, and the skull had deep scratches, like someone had tried to claw their way out. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, and then I saw it. On the stone slab, carved into the surface beneath the body, was my grandmother's name. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The letter, the warnings, the whispers, it all led back to this. My family wasn't just hiding dark secrets. They were part of something older, something terrible. And whatever had happened to my grandma, whatever she had tried to protect us from, wasn't over. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, until they were almost deafening. I could barely think, barely breathe. I had to get out of there. But just as I turned to run, something cold and invisible wrapped around my wrist, yanking me back toward the slab. I dropped the flashlight, plunging the room into near total darkness. I struggled, trying to pull free, but whatever had me wouldn't let go. It felt like icy fingers digging into my skin. And then, a voice, clearer than the whispers, cut through the chaos. Tommy. It was my dad's voice, but it wasn't coming from the phone or upstairs. It was coming from the darkness, from inside the room. Tommy, you shouldn't have come back. I whipped around, trying to find him, trying to see where the voice was coming from. But there was no one there. Just me, the slab, and the bones of my grandmother. They never left. The voice was closer now, right next to me. You need to leave. I could feel something tightening around my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, swirling around me like a storm, and the cold grip on my wrist tightened, dragging me toward the altar. I don't know how, but I managed to break free. I stumbled backward, grabbed the flashlight, and ran. I didn't stop, not once. I sprinted through the tunnel, up the stairs, out of the basement, and into the cold, empty house. The whispers stopped as soon as I slammed the basement door behind me. I stood there, gasping for breath, my back against the door, trying to process what had just happened. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I grabbed my keys, didn't bother packing anything, and drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get as far away from that place as possible. It's been 2 weeks since then, and I haven't gone back. My dad still hasn't answered any of my calls, and I haven't been able to reach him since that voicemail. I don't know what happened to him, or what he was trying to protect me from. But one thing's for sure. Whatever is in that house isn't done with me. I still hear the whispers, sometimes late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment. And I've started dreaming about that basement. about the door, about the thing that's still waiting for me in the dark.